Well, let's turn to the advisory now. And from the 1st of July, the new Aged Care Act comes into place, focusing on those accessing funded aged care services and their rights. Louise Biti is the co-founder and director of Aged Care Steps, and she joins me now. Louise, great to have you with us. How important is it for people in aged care to have advice?
I think it's really important because it's an incredibly complex area. And let me tell you from personal experience, when you're in the middle of that crisis with your own family, just the human elements and the emotional side, not to mention all the legal complexity and the moving parts, make it just so incredibly difficult to navigate that on your own. So the role of advice is to bring an objective and an experienced voice into the equation that can help families look across the options, look beyond the emotions, and help them work together to find a solution that works for that particular family. And I think that's just so invaluable.
How much, playing devil's advocate, is it potentially a bit too late though by the time people go into aged care?
It's never too late. I mean, the earlier you can start to plan, the better the outcome is, because when the crisis hits, which is what you're right, most people leave it until, you're then stuck with a limited set of options and in a very rapid time frame to make those decisions. So sometimes you don't get to explore all the possibilities. But at that point, if that's where you are, it is still important to get advice because you still need to make decisions around the finances and the resources and the way you structure it, and make sure you cut through to what's important for that family. But the earlier you can start that planning, the better. And this is one of the things we try to get the messages across to both older people and their families as well as to financial advisors, is all about start the conversation at any time in retirement. Don't wait for the crisis. Think about it even when you're planning for retirement, in early retirement. Have those conversations about what needs you might have as you get older, what fears you're worried about. Where does that lead you to the choices about where you want to live, the reality of how you might live and what support you might need, and then making sure your finances fit in and you have the right mindset about using those resources effectively. So the earlier you can start that, the better it will be. But don't worry if you haven't, it's still important for advice.
Louise, we've got an interesting strap coming up under your interview at the moment, reminding us that aged care is not just a nursing home. So when you're talking about people in aged care facilities, it can also be the over 55 homes, community living and the like. Just talk us through, I guess, how big this cohort is, particularly as Australians are living longer.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to remember because a lot of people resist the aged care conversation because that you're right, they're thinking nursing home. And not many people really want to go to that pathway. But more and more, we're having options around how we can stay at home, maybe moving into those retirement communities for a safer, easier environment to access that within. At the moment, across Australia, there's over 1 million older people who are accessing some sort of aged care. Now, the majority of those, probably 800,000 of that million or so, are home care services, some at a very low basic level, some at a much more complex packaged level. But we have those sorts of dynamics that we're looking at. And then you probably have a significant number of people who are just struggling day to day on their own with the support of their spouse, who may also be struggling, with the support of families who have got busy lives and other conflicting objectives, or just friends, communities as well. So the numbers are really quite significant in that space. Residential care, nursing homes is one part of it and one really important. But I think with the new Aged Care Act and some of the changes, we are going to see a lot more interest, a lot more innovation, and a lot more of accessibility to all those other in community and at home services. But they are not easy to understand or to find or to get access to. So again, everything comes down to advice, I think.
Now, we talked about the changes coming into effect on the 1st of July. I imagine one change is probably going to be things cost more, but talk us through what's actually happening and how, I guess, prepared people need to be.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of the new Aged Care Act is about the funding, but it's not just that. Um, People's needs are becoming more complex. We are aging, our needs are becoming more complex, and that's bringing a demand for not only quality of care, but a quality of lifestyle while we're accessing those care as well. The new Aged Care Act has been completely rewritten and trying to get more of a focus for the rights of the older person. May seem strange, but really that was needed, that we had to focus on the older person, who they are, what they want, their rights, where and how they want to access care as well. And then the second part is all about that's going to cost us more. Who's going to fund that? Is that the government? Is that the person accessing those services? So it's still going to be a very, very heavily funded section by the government, but we are shifting some of that cost to individuals accessing it. So they will need to pay more. They need to be thinking about cash flow planning because everything's possible if they've managed their cash flow. One of the bits that's concerning is that there's two parts. You've got the costs of just the where you live, whether that's you bought your house, you buy a retirement village unit, you pay a deposit to live in a nursing home, and all of those costs are increasing with not being completely fully refundable that they have up until now for the nursing homes. And then we also have the costs of the day-to-day living, turning the lights on, feeding ourselves, and then the care for all the people around. And that's where a lot of the cost for those services come into play. So I think people need to be understanding it, planning their finances, and making sure they've retained as much of their wealth as possible to really meet those particular needs in their later years.
Well, just picking up on that, Louise, because a reason why a lot of Australians don't get financial advice is the cost. And obviously we know there's a lot of reform and potential regulation underway to address this. But if you're at the latter stage of your life and you are just trying to preserve and enjoy it, wouldn't that be a barrier then for people to say, why would I want to pay for financial advice?
Yeah, I get that, and it can be. People don't understand. It's very hard to understand the value of what you're getting until you've agreed to pay for it and paid for it. So I think, though, the cost is such a small part of what the mistakes would otherwise be. What we see is where the cost really comes in is for those people who didn't get advice and make mistakes or don't make the best opportunities. And so that cost of not getting advice can be greater. Yes, you're going to pay for it, but with that, you get peace of mind to make sure this is one chance at this one big decision. So it's peace of mind that you have thought about it carefully, considered the options, made a decision that worked, and also anticipate the other changes that might happen after you've moved into care. We've seen a lot of cases where people didn't get advice. They based it on what the numbers were at the first point they accessed care, thinking that would stay the same. And then some major things happen where a partner passes away or the person living in the house no longer lives there or they sell a house. All those really big changes that could throw out the numbers quite significantly at a future point, and they're not prepared for that. And then the costs of that can be quite catastrophic.
All right.
So it's peace of mind.